All right, hello, this is Sam with my summative reflection video. I've got my notes here, so I'm going to be looking over this way a bunch. But so jumping right in, looking at the reflection context. So I taught 3 lessons in my learning segments. One on corporate tax rates, one on was the introduction to my ongoing small business simulation, one was the first workday for that. The lesson objective for the first one was to understand the pros and cons of high and low corporate tax rates. Language demands were mostly reading and speaking related. The second one was the intro to simulation. The objective was to work in groups to develop a preliminary plan for a small business simulation. And the third was students will continue to work in groups to develop their small business plan, including coming up with a framework to complete all of their tasks by due dates. So those were the things that I did. Let's see. In terms of the actual reflection component, what did my planning, what did I do in my planning that was successful to support learning? I think honestly, this was overall a pretty successful learning segment. There are definitely some things I would change, obviously, but some of the things that I think I did best were setting up really clear expectations. I introduced lessons, kicked them off pretty effectively. I also made sure that instructions were given in multiple different ways. So I spoke instructions, I delivered them to small groups when people were confused, I had them up on PowerPoint, and then I included brief descriptions of instructions on all of my materials. Let's see, differentiation. I gave pretty basic stuff. So I didn't have any ELL language learners who were at a lower level in any of my classes, so I didn't have to do very much there. And the only adaptations required for the students with specific learning disabilities in my classes were things like preferential seating, options to have extended time on work, things like that. So I did those things within these lessons. I also um, group people up based a little bit on where their strengths were as a learner, and then within each group for the simulation, there are a lot of different options for how to represent your work. So students could kind of pick and choose based on what they were most interested in, where their skills lie. Let's see, looking at the next question. So what were the challenges for my students across the learning segment? Um, so, I mean, clarifying expectations is an ongoing thing. I think I did a pretty good job of it within my learning segment, but you can always get better at that. Pretty much anytime students were off task is because I was not clear enough with expectations. One other thing that I saw a little bit of is within the simulation, some students would sort of narrowly focus on a single thing as opposed to, and then get really stuck in the weeds on that, as opposed to keeping sort of a broad focus across the whole assignment. How did I adjust my instruction in the moment within a lesson? So I'm just going to give a couple examples here because it's a short video. One, for that first lesson on corporate tax rates, I taught that 4 times in total. And the first day I taught it, so the first day I taught first period, then fourth period is my focus class. So that's when I was really I was focused on. And after teaching first period, I reflected on how things had gone and thought that I could add a little bit more rigor by replacing a poster activity with a debate, which I believe you, Marjorie, saw. And then that was reflected in my reflection as well. So that's one thing I did. I think that went well, and it mostly went well. If I had had more time for it, I would have had a more clear rubric in terms of what my expectations were. Other things that I did, let's see, just a lot of clarifying as I went. So for the small business activity, there were individual worksheets that students chose from for the different tasks that they were going to do, and there were a few times where multiple groups were confused about the same thing. So, for example, like how do I actually, I know what I have to accomplish for this, but how do I turn in my work, or how do I show my work? And so when I did find situations like that, when it was just one person who's confused about it, they didn't read the directions or something, clarified with them individually. Excuse me. But when it looked like it was a larger issue, I actually just went back to the front of the class, rang my bell, and then was able to clarify for the larger group as well. Those are just a couple small examples. Feedback given and how I would change it. Most of the feedback that I gave, there weren't many assessments given within this small learning segment. I gave, for the corporate tax rates activity, I had an exit ticket where I asked students to just say, do you think Congress should support tax cuts for corporations? Why or why not? It's just a short thing. I expected a paragraph with multiple citations. So I gave feedback on, probably the biggest feedback that I gave was you included citations, but you didn't explain them. So you didn't explain why this evidence supports your claim. How I would change it looking back, I honestly don't think I would really change it very much. I think that the feedback that I gave sort of fit the responses that I got and fit the needs of the lessons. Let's see. Adjustments I would make for future lessons. So I made that adjustment for my for the corporate tax rate lesson. I would, if I were to do that again, I would adjust it again. I think the biggest problem that I had with that is that I wasn't as prepared as I wanted to be in terms of like having a rubric and knowing how long each step was going to take. So it ended up being kind of rushed at the end. And I don't think it was 100% clear to students what was expected. I think they knew from previous classes, having done activities like this before, but I would have liked to really clarify what I was expecting for this one. And for the simulation, I think overall, I'm now like almost 2 weeks in. I think the simulation is going really well. Students are really excited about it. They're doing some really fantastic work. But I think it would have, if I were to go back to that, I would do two things differently. One, I would add CLOs to each task so that I would be able to point out what the learning objective is as students are working on them. And then two, I would try to make it a little bit more challenging, add a little bit more rigor to some of those tasks. And I had 9 different tasks, so I don't want to go through all of them, but I have some specific ideas. I do think this is a valuable lesson, and if I end up ever teaching econ again, I would probably go back to it. So that is my summative reflection. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I came within my 5 to 7 minute window.